Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's time once again for another one of our Sacred Marriage segments. If you were with us last time, we had just completed a series on the fruit of the Spirit with what we called fruit salad. Well, as always, I'm happy to have beside me my precious wife, Lisa. Welcome, sweetheart.
Glad to be here.
And I'm especially glad to have her here because for today's segment, I want her to share with you a piece that she wrote a little more than a week ago. And, I've done everything I can to promote it as much as I can. And this is one more opportunity to encourage folks to read it. She has it, by the way, pinned on our shared Facebook page. So if you go to RC-Lisa Sproul on Facebook, you can see it there. But I'm going to have her just read through it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what inspired it. And again, for me, what a blessing it is to have this woman by my side. Go ahead, sweetheart.
God has opened wonderful opportunities for my husband to speak this year. R.C. once thrived on being used by God, traveling the world, teaching, preaching, and speaking, leading others to Christ and a deeper understanding of God's Word, among other things. 7 years ago, his life hit rock bottom. God began to move in more profound ways. Little did I know then that God would make this man my husband a year later. 6 years ago, we married. Prior to our marriage, he resigned where he was pastoring. And within our first 10 days, living as man and wife, God abruptly knocked a couple more idols off of his life, alcohol being one of them. He wasn't an alcoholic, but nonetheless drank too much, especially on November 28, 2016. God yanked him out of his world. He demoted him, got a hold of his heart. People might have been done with him, but God wasn't. He had R.C. right where he providentially postured him. R.C. didn't blame others for his choices. It was no longer God's plan for R.C. to remain in status quo. You have no idea what people of high influence do. Politics are just as dirty in ministries as the White House. And God is cleaning house. He doesn't tolerate idols, whether alcohol or other things. When I look at R.C., I see a modern-day Paul, a man whose life became forever changed on his personal road to Damascus. His religion wasn't relationship. He lacked authenticity. He was a performer. Many of his contemporaries are performers. He kept the faith. Though many abandoned him, God never abandoned him. Studies show pastors burn out in ministry within 3 years. Suicide rates have increased greatly among clergy. Depression, addictions, poor coping skills, lack of vulnerability, all setups for a perfect storm. Pastors become overwhelmed, lonely, and subsequently leave ministries. Pastors' wives often get lost, become plastic, struggle with eating disorders, perfection syndrome, and often become isolated. Ministry marriages can suffer greatly, and children can rebel and hate the church. So what happens when burnout comes? When pastors are tossed to and fro? Ministry families get destroyed. Who strengthens these men, women, and children to keep pursuing God, to restore and return to the church? God doesn't throw away his leaders. Though some are truly disqualified from ministry, many are walking wounded and lose hope. They need restored. Are you called to such a task? We are. We understand the hardships that come, the trials and man-made idols that develop in time, confronting and bringing healing to broken pastors and families in need of hope. Ministry is work. Ministers need restored to their first love. They need hope. As I see God begin to move on RC's behalf, I think of these last 6 years, all that God has done, all the truth that's come out, all the changes and how God has navigated such a man to surrender his life to the God who called him before the foundation of the world. 2022 has been a profound year. God is working his plans.
Well, sweetheart, that's, again, just absolutely beautiful. And as I'm listening to it again, one of the things that crossed my mind is how wonderful it is that you don't airbrush me.
No, I don't airbrush anybody.
No.
Including myself.
No airbrushes at all. I mean, you're laying out there the reality of my own failures, my own weaknesses, my own warts, my own sins. And the end of the story isn't, look how wonderful I've become. The end of the story is God's grace. And, you're sticking with me. Is grounded in that grace. It's not, I had hoped that you would become X. It's, we're both in God's hands, and he is at work, and he has plans. I mean, it's just, there's a beautiful capacity to accept and own our failures and our weaknesses when we know that it doesn't mean God's done with us. Mm-hmm. Is that something? I mean, that you've been through the same similar kinds of hardships or uncertainties about.
Well, the motivation behind what I wrote was multifaceted. First, it was remembering that this year, one of your speaking gigs, who actually has booked you out for 4 times in 2022, came to you because they said they were so sad to see your own tribe throw you under the bus and destroy you, and that you would be the perfect person to speak to their men who have also been thrown away.
Right.
And this guy came from
nowhere.
God's hand.
Yes.
And what a beautiful thing. The second thing was, I do believe that Twitter is a lot. People take a lot of liberty when they size people up.
Okay.
And somebody had sized you up, and I read it, and it annoyed me because I thought, these people don't know you. They see you through a glass half dim, you know, and have never met you, have never spoken to you, have read snark about you on the internet. And my thought was, well, if you look up John MacArthur, if you look up Joel Osteen, if you look up T.D. Jakes, if you look up your pastor on your street, you may not see your pastor there. But you go and you look up any famous pastor, and you will see slander, you will see defamation of character, and your own sin doesn't need help.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So, and I thought of that, and I thought, Paul was like that.
Yes.
He was persecuted. And Paul, even beyond that, people would say, boy, you just sound so good in your letters. But you get in person,
right,
and people have these expectations, and the bar gets dropped because you don't meet their expectations. And hello, church, stop looking for your pastor to entertain you. Stop looking for leaders to entertain you. That's a problem that we have. And we look to men to fulfill this need that we have instead of going to God. And then it takes me to the place where how many other pastors are beat up And there is no voice for them. And there is no safe place for them, because now they're getting kicked out of their church because they were vulnerable enough to say, I have a problem.
Right.
You know, we aren't, you and I, we are called very much to encourage, to confront, to bring people to wholeness. We are not a addiction counseling service.
No.
We can help with the rejection, the betrayal, the weariness,
Yes.
the relationship aspect of marriages being tilted. And again, when I spoke about idols in this, it was with your OWI. You know, you weren't an alcoholic, but you certainly had idols.
Yes.
Every one of us have idols. And I think for me as your wife, I take great pleasure in trying to write things that encourage you, that speak to the masses, but also speak to other people who maybe are not R.C. Sproul Jr., but they need a booster shot of hope. And they're retired pastors, or they're pastors who are like, girl, you know it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love, in fact, I was talking to our friend Pat about this, and it goes back to the very beginning, and you're coming into my life not as a fangirl. Now, you know, you can emphasize that to the part where it starts to hurt a little bit, but in principle, it's a really good thing, because what happens with image is you, just like the idea of what you buy them with, you have to keep giving them. And if you project an image and people react positively to the image, and you know that that's not really you, then you don't get anything out of that. You don't get any encouragement. So when you speak about encouraging me, you're not encouraging me like a fan person would. Oh, RC, you do this so well, or you do that so well, or I love this message, or blah, 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 blah. You're encouraging me as a person, and especially as a Christ follower. You're encouraging me to remember and to rest in what God has spoken in His Word. And so, you know, that I want people to understand that in a sense, the difference between encouragement and flattery. Mm-hmm. And you really have that down pat.
Well, and I want to say, you know, when you talk about someone being enamored with any speaker, whether it's you or anyone else, that is something every human being has to fight against, the resistance of putting someone up on a pedestal.
Yes.
But with your own words, you've even said, you know, you're not that person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you paint yourself in a box, then people have expectations that, and now you're stuck, whether, you know, kind of in, I think it's Psalm 118 that said, trust in the Lord. It's better to trust in the Lord than to take refuge in man. Mm-hmm. And man is not our hope.
No.
And you just, when we talk about showing up to perform, it is just not about you. And every pastor needs to hear that.
Yeah.
This is not about your personality. This is not about how much you can exegete the scriptures. It is about the Spirit of God moving through your mouth to bring truth. And that's my hope for every church that we are by. And we have great men of God around us.
Yes, we do.
We have great churches that are here, all different types of denomination. And I really feel like God's breaking down that denominational wall. Mm-hmm. You know, you want to talk about, I hate to use the BLM, but, you know, you have this within churches, not the black and white issue, but the denominational wall.
Right.
And it becomes so much that we hate our brother because they're Arminian.
Right.
And, you know, good God, Arminians are going to be in heaven.
Yes, they
Get
are.
over it.
Yep.
So there is just so much. But the hope is that you are a modern day Paul, dear, and that God would use you to speak His truth. And we've talked about this before. You know, there's a season in our life where we were known in one category. And you can't bring that old wine and put it in new wineskins.
Yep.
And you think you can until the message doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And then God kind of turns you upside down and says, son, I have something new for you. And Isaiah talks about, do you not perceive it? It springs up.
Right.
And so it is really not about how many sermons you have memorized and all the things you knew. It's about being level at the cross, on your face before God, and saying, Lord, change me. If you're using me, whether it's to write or to speak, then let me step aside and God just use everything in me.
Amen. Sweetheart, I want to thank you for being with me on this segment, but also, most important, being with me in our lives. You are precious to me.
And you're precious to me.
I love you, and I couldn't have a better wife. Thank you, sweetheart.
Oh, that's great.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.